Welcome to the 7.1 reading guide discussion. The 7 stands, of course, for the topic, which is the Roman Republic, and the point 1 stands for Lesson 1, the Roman Republic rises. We need to know what the time frame of this is. It's around 800 BCE, so that's the old BC, but the current, we refer to it as BCE. So you're looking at, if we're around the year 2000, this is about 2,800 years ago, along the Tiber River in present-day Italy. We know that a village called Rome was built. It is important that you know that this all happened on the Italian peninsula, and that it all happened around this river known as the Tiber. Two mountain ranges affecting Italy. We talked about this earlier in class, that the Alps sort of separate Italy from the rest of Europe. It was a nice natural barrier. And then the Apennines, they sort of look like the spine. They run down the center of the Italian peninsula. Because Italy was less rugged than Greece, what was made easier for the Roman people? Well, it was mainly the soldiers, as they could transport the soldiers easily from place to place. All right, how did the large, fertile flat plains of Italy help the Romans, and what was produced on Roman farms? Well, let's talk about the first part of the question first. It gave them plenty of land suitable for farming. Certain parts of Italy were very rich and fertile. Growing conditions were perfect for things such as olive oil, wheat, grapes, and wine. Olive oil and grapes really became the cash crops of the Romans. And cash crops would be, if you're not aware, it's a surplus crop, and then you end up using, whatever's left over extra, which that's what surplus means, to sell, and you end up making money from those things. And so the Romans became very well known for grapes to produce wine, and all of their olive oil. Their olive oil was well sought around the Mediterranean region. The Greeks were the same way. They had the same growing climate and the same sort of soil. They also raised sheep and goats for milk and wool on the Roman farms as well. Ancient Rome was part of a region called Latium. The region gave its name to the Latin people, and then also later on their language was also called Latin. So you've got a group of people that are living there that are called the Latins, and they're going to mix with two other groups, some leftover Greeks that were on the peninsula, and then another group called the Etruscans, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Archaeologists have discovered that people first settled in Rome around 800 BCE. We know that they built the villages on top. They built villages on top of 7 hills overlooking the Tiber, near where the river flows into the sea. If you become a history major, you will know the names of all 7 of these hills. I'm going to only make you know 2. The first one, which is the original one, the Palatine, which is where supposedly the Romulus and Remus story occurred. This is the main hill where many of the main buildings are, and then also the Capitoline, which is where all the religious buildings are. So each one of these hills has a name. We'll look at a diagram that shows them all, but I'm going to need you to know 2. Palatine, where it all got started, and the Capitoline, where all the religious buildings are. All right, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Romulus-Remus story. We do know it's legend. It's a made-up story. Supposedly these boys were the son of Mars, the god of war, and they end up coming back and being raised by a wolf, and then a shepherd, and then starting a city. And we do know that Romulus supposedly killed Remus, and that's how Rome got its name. We don't know what a forum is based from our discussion on the pre-read, or the vocabulary terms. It is an open area filled with public buildings, temples, and markets, and we do know that this is the center pretty much of anything that went on in Roman social life and governmental and religious life. There was a swampy area between 2 of the town's hills, and that's where they put the forum. But I think one of the important things that you need to see here is that the Romans later built a forum at the center of most of the cities when they founded new ones. 3 main geographic factors that led to Rome's success. Number 1, the hills provided a natural defense. It's easier to defend when you're on top of the hill. There's a game we used to play called King of the Mountain, where somebody would stand on top of a hill and the other people would come up and try to take them off the hill, and it was always the person that was on the top's advantage because you have gravity on your side. And so anytime you're defending a hill, you can roll rocks. It's easier to shoot arrows. It's easier for you to fight with gravity on your side if you've ever played that King of the Hill game. We also know that the Tiber River gave access to a nearby port. That port was called Ostia, and it was about 7 miles downriver from Rome. So Rome was not directly on the Mediterranean. You had to go, up and down the Tiber River to get there. And this river was very shallow, and only small boats could reach the city, which was important because it was too shallow and too fast and too dangerous for large war boats. So a naval attack on the city of Rome was not a possibility, which was another geographic advantage that the Romans enjoyed. the fertile soil was really big. We'll talk more later about that. They were just lucky, and there are volcanoes on the Italian peninsula. They are dormant, but the volcanoes end up providing fertile soil in the long run for the people of the peninsula. Okay, like Athens and Sparta, Rome began as an independent city-state, and its first form of government was known as a monarchy. So they did start off with kings, although the kings were not very good for the people, and the aristocrats overthrew them. But we'll talk about that in a little bit with Tarquin the Proud, who formed a governing body called the Senate. And what did they do? Well, they were older, wealthy male aristocrats who advised and gave consent to the king. The word Senate, which is a word that we use today, comes from the Latin word senex, which means old man. And so these were the people who did all this advising. They were old males from the most well-known families in Rome. And so these were the guys that advised the leaders, and first the kings, and then later on the consuls, and then later on the emperors. Here in the United States, we've borrowed this term from the Romans. We do refer to one of our governing bodies as the United States Senate. There are 100 people there. There are some differences, though. They're not all old white men, although most of them are. There are, representation of people of color and also women in the United States Senate. I believe last check, I think there were 23 or 24 out of the 100 were women. I actually met a United States Senator. I'll talk more about that when we look at the slides for this reading guide. What happened to the seventh king of Rome, Tarquin the Proud? Well, the people had just had enough. They had seen that Greece was a democracy, and they wanted to pattern a lot of their government after the Greek style. So Tarquin was mistreating the people, and so the aristocrats said, "We're done with you, Tarquin. We're going to overthrow you, and we're going to start a republic." And so this is when the Roman Republic kicks in. It is a government in which people have the right to vote and to elect officials. The word republic comes from actually Latin term res publica, which means public thing or public business. In the Roman Republic, all free adult male citizens could play a role in the city's government. So the word republic actually comes from this Latin word. What are three things Romans adopted from the Greeks? Well, they took some ideas from the Greeks. Number one, the Greek idea of democracy. Number two, they took the Greek style of religion, which was Greek mythology, and basically all they did was they took all the Greek gods, they had the gods in charge of the same things, and they just changed the names to suit the themselves. So basically they copied everything other than they decided, we're going to give them different names. They also adopted Greek legends, and some of the most famous ones, they just pretty much write the sequel of the Iliad. Homer wrote his own sequel, which was called the Odyssey, in which one of the Greeks who fought in the Trojan War, it's about his journey back home to Greece. Well, the Romans write their own, which is called the Aeneid. And in the Aeneid, and this is actually number 17, this bleeds into number 17, it shows somebody that fought on the Trojan side in the Trojan Wars, and his name was Aeneas, and they believe that he ended up founding the city of Rome as well, that Romulus and Remus were descendants of this dude, and he ends up fleeing Troy as it's burning, and there's all kinds of things about a special sword and about landing in the Phoenician colony of Carthage, and a love story, and all kinds of crazy things that we'll talk about in class. But the Aeneid's pretty cool, and this whole idea of picking up the story of the Iliad and the sequel, this is the Roman version right here, and the guy's name is Virgil, and he of course admired Homer very much. Alright, so I told you that the Romans were really made up of three groups of people: the Greeks, the Latins, and this was the third group. They were called the Etruscans. They lived in central Italy, and they were very powerful, just north of where the Latins lived, and just north of where Rome is located now. And their strengths were they were skilled artists and builders, they were very good sailors, and they had developed a really strong alphabet. So the Etruscan alphabet really is what they borrowed from the Greeks and the Phoenicians, and this ends up becoming the alphabet that the Romans borrowed and became part of their culture. They also influenced Roman religion, and also they were good at building things, and one of the things that they experimented with was the arch, and we know that the Romans were famous for building structures with arches. All right, the Roman people were feared conquerors. They were very good with their military, as you already know, but they also made skillful use of diplomacy, and they used both of these things, force and diplomacy, to get things done. Their relationships with other countries would be, well, we're going to give you a couple choices. One of those choices is that we're going to roll in with our army. The other choice is going to be that we are going to offer diplomacy for you. All right, so by using force and diplomacy, the Romans ruled all of Italy by the late 200s BC. We do have somebody that's in charge of diplomacy here in the United States. There's been a lot of turnover in the Trump administration of all of his cabinet, but the guy that is in charge right now is Mike Pompeo. He is the current Secretary of State. How many soldiers in the Roman legion? We do know there's somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000. I have a typo there. It should say 5,000, and many of them served as infantry soldiers, just basically rank and file, foot soldiers, hand-to-hand combat infantry. What's a maniple? We do know that a maniple is a version or is a break-off group of the Roman legion, and we know that there's somewhere between 660 to 160 soldiers in that group of people. One of the good things about a maniple is they're very flexible, and that they could break away and fight as an independent group. We know that Alexander the Great and the Macedonians invented the phalanx. It was actually Alexander's dad, Philip, that invented it, and Alexander made it famous. But we do know that the advantages of the phalanx, the maniple over the phalanx, was that they could fight on hilly terrain, and it was way more flexible than a phalanx. The maniple could fight as an independent group or as an entire group together. Roman soldiers, what they do in addition to fighting, they were very good builders. They could build, and they actually would build a temporary fort every night. They split the fort up into grids, and then they would sleep in the same grid space every night. So the different things would go into the different spots on the grid, and they were very efficient at building the forts. They could march up to 30 miles a day, build a fort, tear the fort down in the morning, march another 30 miles. They were a very efficient military machine. They also built roads and bridges to help their armies move faster. There's a story about Julius Caesar building a bridge across a river just to show the enemy he could do that, and then tearing it back down and traveling away. How did the Rome gain power? Using the help of its allies. Well, we do know that the Romans signed treaties with other people, often defeated enemies, and they offered them citizenship, and this was a big thing. So after the Romans would win wars, they would offer citizenship and ask the people really basically to send troops to fight alongside the Romans in their wars. Many of the Roman soldiers had never even been to the Italian peninsula as the empire grew to be very large. People had grown up and lived their whole life in Spain and fought for the Roman army and considered themselves Romans, although they were born, out on the Iberian Peninsula. So it gave these non-Romans a sense of belonging, a sense of citizenship to be part of the most powerful empire in the world. Lastly, this is an opinion question. Do you feel the Roman method of turning enemies into friends is more effective than ruling with an iron fist? Well, it's up to you. It's whatever you think. If sometimes if you rule with an iron fist, sometimes you could have people that would be have ill will towards you, and maybe make them want to rebel because you're treating them so harshly. But then also some people see kindness as a weakness, and if the Romans were too friendly to these conquered people, that they might take advantage of that situation. It probably would depend how you feel. I'm guessing it'd be a little bit of both if I were answering this question. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching the first Ed puzzle of the year.